Okay, it's live. So today is April 30th, 2014. It's 12 o'clock Pacific right now, and this is DB Hangops. Today we are going to be talking about database defense part two, more in-depth dive, and we've got some folks that weren't here last time, so they can kind of give their background and perspective on it. And also hopefully some 5.6 upgrade stories. This was something that Ike had mentioned last time, so he'll be able to give us his background on it, and if other folks here have had to do with 5.6 upgrades, gotchas, things that are great, all that stuff can kind of come in. So without further ado, I'm Jeff. I'm a DBA at Box. And go ahead and do a quick round of introductions. Let's go ahead and start with you, Dan.
Hey, I'm Dan Smythe, development and engineering over at GoDaddy.
Okay, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a DBA at Snow.
Okay, Jerry.
I'm Jerry Narvaja, and I'm a senior sales engineer at SkySQL.
And Shiri.
I'm Shiri Cabral, and I am a database team manager and also DBA at Mozilla.
Cool. And like I said, some other folks might be popping in later on that run a little bit late, but I guess for now, let's go ahead and get started. So last time we talked pretty in depth about database defense, and from a lot of different kind of perspectives. A few were called out after the fact on Twitter, and so I'll hopefully can inject some conversation around that. But for anyone who wasn't here last time, and so I'm actually mostly looking at you, Shiri and Jerry, actually and Dan, well, everyone here is new today almost. But just database defense, like when I say that, what does that mean to you? What kind of things do you do for it? And just kind of go with there. It's great to get more just kind of diverse conversation around it.
Well, at Mozilla, we definitely have the rule that if we're doing anything across data centers or in Amazon, we use SSL for replication, so that nobody can, sneak off and see things. Same with backups. Make sure they're done securely, via SSH if you have to copy something over, right? SCP, so that things are encrypted. And then we also have, internally we have VLANs and firewalls and things like that. So for the stuff that's internal, we don't necessarily use SSL replication, but we are somewhat protected by things like firewalls and VLANs and all that kind of stuff. There's not really such a thing as having a secure database. You just have more security and less security. So, that's kind of the grain of salt I take things with.
Okay, and how about things like application changes that maybe throw a bad query at the server or things like that? Do you have any sort of tools in place for that or anything you do?
No, I think the application security, we do have an application security department. So we have operational security as well as application security. So if somebody is writing, developing a program, that would go to application security. If we want to use like a third-party program, that goes to operational security, if that helps distinguish between the two. So we do have mechanisms in place to make sure that the code is secure and there aren't too many security holes to the best of our ability.
Okay. Do you ever have to deal with things like killing problematic queries as they come in, or maybe certain alerts that go off to help you verify the health of the database, just aside from actual security concerns?
We do. We've had to deal with kind of the database DOSing itself, if that's the kind of thing you mean. And sometimes we've had to write ad hoc scripts just kill things that are running this particular query or this particular process. Luckily, we're in touch with the developers, and we usually can get them to change whatever it is to happen, because usually it's a release that they then need to back out or something. It's not usually something that happens and catches us by surprise. And we have our own issues with things like the checksums. That checksumming all your data produces heavy load. So there have been times where we have changed how we do checksums so that we can not put too much load on the servers.
Yeah, so that's another good one that I think we might not have covered last time. But another aspect of database defense is actually the data integrity and the value of making sure that that is the case across multiple sites, multiple replicas. And obviously for the safety of everyone who's going to be using that data. But yeah, so I guess at this point, open it a little more broadly for other folks who missed out on the conversation last time. Just database defense. What kind of things do you do to protect your database? Are there things around health? for the server, or keeping it generally available, and any other things that you can think of?
What I would recommend is proper password policies. The password, keep it protected on your .my.cnf file on your home directory if it is a complex password. Password for the applications and things like that. And just for fun, I posted a URL on the a URL on the chat that shows a cracking website that if you provide the hash and you're using dictionary words or words that are close to dictionary, it uses rainbow tables to crack your MySQL passwords. So don't be cute. This is something that it is real threat, and you need to pay attention to that, and having random generated passwords is a very good idea. Well, the other way around, you have to put the hash in there, right?
Hey, now let me learn to use the tool the proper way.
And the reason it uses a CAPTCHA is to avoid bots exploiting it.
Gotcha. So yeah, here's a screenshot of the tool that Jerry was referencing, crackstation.net. Yeah, you could do a lot of damage with this. I'm pretty sure you could also just go to Google and dump the hash in, and you probably would get an answer back too.
I think that Google has changed something in their search algorithms, because I did a presentation a few years back where that was true, and then I tried to repeat my own tests from the presentation, and they never worked. As a matter of fact, some of the rainbow table resources that I had bookmarked on that presentation weren't there anymore, and couldn't find them anymore. So this one came through a conversation, internal conversation yesterday, and that's why I had it fresh. But yes, there are sites where you can actually download the full rainbow tables to your system and then script your attacks or script your defenses. And then you can, the way you would use it for a database defense is you would go through your hashes and tell users, hey, you have a dictionary password, please change it, or we're getting vulnerable to an attack.
So if I can chime in for a second here, we did something over at GoDaddy where we built an entire password cycling system where application owners internal to the company, they request DSNs. We generate random usernames and passwords for them, and in a pair. And there's like a whole API library and a number of different languages built so that application owners, they call this API. The username and password stored only in memory, and they use that to do their authentication against our databases. And it's individual for every single user, for every single database, on every single system. So if there's an issue, rotating users is pretty simple. They flip a switch, and everything automatically starts using the second one. That gives us time to, delete the first ones and divvy out new ones. So that's kind of what we did over here as far as, being able to quickly change millions of users across everything at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, and that's pretty important. I mean, because and Jerry, I think, started most of this conversation around the notion of having a password policy in place, and I mean, just genuinely the importance in that. I mean, I guess one of the questions I would ask is, does anyone here use LDAP authentication for MySQL logins, like the LDAP plugin? I'm getting, looks like not a lot of people, and that's the thing is like, it can work, it can fix and solve that problem. But there are certain edge cases where it might not be the best case, and I know for me, like we could turn on LDAP authentication for most users, but there are certain ones like application accounts where there's kind of high velocity connections. You don't necessarily want to add another dependency against authenticating through an LDAP service, or if, even if you have that information cached. And so something that I've been working on here is a tool that simply, given a list of grant statements, will actually reconcile kind of everything in the server. And so just having that managed through something like Puppet. And I mean, I remember Sherry, you had the presentation that you and Brandon had done on how Puppet, Puppet is used at Mozilla. And one of the things that was in there was a grant module that would add or revoke grants to a server, and you could just have those defined in Puppet as well. And I mean, so that's like definitely certainly a very easy way just to start having it like well defined and have a history of it. And then, but obviously, the next step is if you have rotations in place and you want to make sure you're not recycling passwords, that adds some more complexity and some stuff you're going to have to build on. And I think I remember just from the Percona conference, I think in 5.7 there was a little. I feel like I heard an announcement about kind of the starting of roles or being able to define roles. I can't remember though. I'd have to look again.
Roles are part of the whole, like, using LDAP to do it. So that was, I'm sure it was announced a while ago. It was, I think it's been available since 5.5. If not, it could be 5.6.
Okay.
So
is it the proxy user stuff then, or?
Yeah, proxy user stuff.
Gotcha.
That's what I thought. So you still really can't have more than one person for roles. If you want to do roles, you have to use like SecureRich or something like that.
Gotcha.
And in MariaDB 10, I think there's some kind of implementation of roles.
Actually, yeah, that's what I was saying, but I was muted. Thank you, Daniel. It is more valuable if you say it. I sound too salesy otherwise.
Well, if you guys, if possible, do you want to pass me links to some of the the MariaDB implementation of roles?
I'll look it up.
In the notes. Cool.
And of course, there's also the password validation plugin in. I think it's MySQL Enterprise only, but it's something you could use to set a password policy. And I think in 5.7 you can even do it a bit more.
And MariaDB also has the authentication plugin open source, which is similar functionality to the enterprise one from MySQL. I'll find the links to both.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Amir with you from Saudi Arabia. Actually, I'm from East. It's 10 p.m. out here. I first time joined these Hangouts, my first experience. I do not have much of the knowledge about database, but certainly we utilize that in our work. As I typed over there that I work in a hotel industry in sales and marketing department, so we do have a database for our customers, clients, and for different other resources. So one of the case happened that once it was stolen. We do have a whole network actually in the hotel because we have a big chain of hotels there, around 36 hotels in the kingdom. So actually someone penetrated through all the network, and our database is actually on cloud. So it was stolen all, and some emails were sent which were not meant to be sent actually to the client. So we suffered a lot. Maybe 3-4 months it took on us for the recovery, and we lost a couple of money because of that specific incident. So it's very nice to join you all there. So I wouldn't take much time because I don't have really much knowledge about IT. So I'm from business area. Thanks for letting me in.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. And I mean, if you have other folks that work specifically on the database servers or managing them, I mean, I'd encourage you to invite them into this to share their experience and discuss things that they have to deal with. Cool. So it looks like Jerry and Daniel got me some links, so I will add those to the show notes. But yeah, so do other folks have other things about database defense? I mean, it sounds like we've been focusing a lot on the security side. I mean, are there other things outside of password management and enabling just SSL on the connections that kind of come to mind when you're thinking about securing the actual integrity and safety of the data that you ultimately manage?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on for hours about what happens in shared hosting.
Dude, please.
We've got a very extensive shared hosting environment. I think we're putting something like 16,000 customer databases on one instance. And because of this, we run into horrible, horrible, horrible replication issues all the time. So we built a fixed slave script that regrettably is like 5,000 some odd lines of bash. But that guy saves our butt big time. It handles so many different cases where a replication could break, and this most recent iteration of it, well, I backported the dynamic replication filter rules to 5.5, and so in 5.5 it works really fast. What we'll do is if we have a customer that's breaking replication constantly, we'll dynamically pull them out of replication, throw them into like a little tracking table, and then we just dump and import his database from the master back to the slave, and then re-enable him in replication, of course, with all the necessary logic to make sure that works right. And that's I'm entertained by this cartoon now. Hang on.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So.
So yeah, that's one thing that we're dealing with in shared hosting almost constantly. We did run into a problem where we put our tempter on a RAM disk, and it's like 8 gigabytes. And what we found, and Jeremy Tinley just filed a bug for it. What we found is that with MyISAM, and more frequently with row-based replication, if a large binlog event comes through, and you've got 16,000 some odd people doing large row-based events, it actually writes like the temporary binlog in the tempter, and so when that tempter runs out of space, what happens is the engine is returning, hey, I'm out of space, but it goes ahead and writes a corrupt binlog anyway. So that's like one of our major headaches now, because typically that means we have to rebuild the whole instance, which isn't a fully automated process just yet. So we're running some tests right now. Hardware has improved so much. I think we're just going to stop putting tempter on a RAM disk and see if everything still works nicely. But so shared hosting is an absolute mess, and we've got FixSlave is the big tool that we use that just sees what the replication problem is, worst case scenario, pulls them out of replication, reloads the database, and then puts them back into replication.
Cool. So I'm going to actually steal the focus real quick. Jerry threw this in and had commented, database defense is not complete without referencing this XKCD comic number 327 if you haven't seen it. And I mean, this brings up a whole another slew of defense and security stuff when it comes to MySQL, and just SQL in general, which is SQL injection. And if you haven't had to deal with it, if you have, you probably see why this is funny. If you haven't, I'm sure we can start digging up some resources to share about some of the horrors that can come with this and things you should do. And the big one is, at least if you're using MySQL, from something like PHP or Python, they all have some sort of escape function or like safe query string function that you can use. And in lieu of that, definitely using prepared statements will help protect you against this. Okay. But yeah, so Dan, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been talking to Jeremy earlier this week on and off, and he was explaining to us about, Dan just left. But this tempter issue with the bin logs filling up, and people keep kind of shuffling around.
Yeah, I hit the wrong button.
Okay, but yeah, Dan, I was just saying, that issue you were describing, how Jeremy was telling us about it earlier this week, and just having tempter fill because of the bin log temp space having to happen, and definitely thinking about security and just like protecting the database infrastructure itself in a shared environment is a lot more volatile than it is in an environment like where I am, where we actually control most of the things, and we can be directly in contact with all of our engineers that are ultimately driving the changes against the server up to a point. I mean, obviously edge cases will happen that are driven by customers, but I kind of hit a wall on where to go from here. I kind of want more people to just talk about what do you do to defend yourself.
Actually, I have a question more than anything else to one of the problems I also encounter with databases, and in a way this is different than protecting passwords and security, is how do you deal in cloud environments or shared environments with quote-unquote noisy neighbors? That means you're running on a machine that is shared by a number of other people. Maybe it's the MySQL instance that you have multi-tenants. Maybe it's just virtualization. And then you have someone who's hogging all the resources. And your particular instance, whether it's the VM or the database, slows down to a crawl. How do you protect yourselves of that?
That's a really challenging question. And I mean, for us, like we're looking at doing OpenStack for some stuff, and debating like, can we move database infrastructure to a hosted virtual environment like that with shared storage? And I mean, I just have no take on it personally because we're not dealing with it right now. I as a DBA, I'm just sitting here screaming no as loudly as possible. Don't take away my fancy solid states that are just for me. But certainly for folks that have to do work in Amazon, like you can buy provisioned IOPS in Amazon, which gives you some shield.
Yeah, but that gives you the minimum IOPS that you'll have. But if you're used to the regular IOPS that you get, which is much higher, and you adjust your systems for that, then when you hit the limits, you're not getting what you thought you were getting. So I don't know. It's an open question, and I've every time I see people going onto the cloud, I always wonder about that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Does anyone here run infrastructure in the cloud? Nope.
Not us.
It's a good question to bring up next time, I think, when we have a few more people. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, though, Jerry. That's something that I've always wondered about. I mean, we do have some infrastructure that we're putting in AWS for, and I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about, but for new products, effectively. And I mean, that was like an open question, but I think provisioned IOPS is ultimately the solution we're going for it. And I'm also curious, like how, like with Amazon, the difference between using something like RDS, which will give you a lot of automation for free around managing infrastructure, versus setting up an actual, EC2 AMI that you put everything into and have, MySQL managed through there on the host level. Ike just joined. Maybe Ike has some experience with this. Do you run any infrastructure in the cloud?
Yep. Yeah, we're everything's in AWS for us.
Ah, okay. So perfect timing then. So Jerry was one. We were discussing kind of database defense, and one of the things that Jerry had raised was protecting yourself against hardware resources, and resource allocation. And running in a shared environment, when things can be a little turbulent and you might lose some IOPS that you normally have or some other resources. How do you deal with that?
Yep. So, we've been in AWS for a long time. All our databases are EBS backed. EBS is notorious for having variable latency. So Amazon's done some things over the years to make that a little better. They introduced EBS optimized instances a few years ago so that you can choose an EC2 instance that's optimized to work with EBS. That there's no specific promises about that, but you're supposed to get better performance that way. Also, they have something called provisioned IOPS, where if you pay a little bit extra, and if your instance size is large enough, you can get somewhat better guarantees about how many IOPS you get. So we run with both of those, and that definitely helps. There's some other tricks that people have done in the past. So for example, to minimize noisy neighbor syndrome, what a lot of people would do is, even if your database is only 250 gigabytes, say, what people will do is they'll allocate a full terabyte EBS volume because that's the largest EBS volume you can get. The thought being that, if you get the biggest volume, you've got a more dedicated resource, so you're not sharing that with anybody else. That's not something that we've resorted to, but I know some people do that. But yeah, certainly EBS is a pain, and there's some ways to deal with it, but life in the cloud, you definitely have to deal with. It's just like any virtualized environment, right?
And what about shifting the load? If one server gets really slow, shifting the load to some other server, whether it's master, a Galera cluster, or something like that.
Yeah, so I can speak specifically to our setup at Flyte. So we're master. active passive, so we don't have any sort of automatic failover for writes, but our write volume is actually pretty low, relatively speaking. But for reads, some of our databases do get pretty high read volume, so we do health checks on those, and we use HA proxy so we can fail from one database to another, or spread the load across multiple read slaves as needed if we have issues like that.
Okay, yeah, and ultimately noisy neighbors, it's a situation you can see in a whole different set of environments, and and it can be applied on different kind of verticals. The notion of cloud infrastructure or virtual environment, just running in VMware, or having maybe just the fiber to the storage area network being saturated by another thing. And then in Dan's case, I'd actually say like noisy neighbor syndrome is just users saturating the actual hardware they have. And stealing, basically the hardware resources from other users. But I think something else that I was really curious about for you, Ike, is how do you have to make any decisions or changes in your config, like the my.cnf and restarting servers based on how noisy some of the traffic, like how noisy some of the neighbors might actually get?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not something we've done in the past. We tend to not make a lot of config changes. We find what works for a given database type. If it's a read slave serving a certain app, we find the config that's right for that, and then we stick with it. But from time to time, as Amazon comes up with new instance types, we'll evaluate whether we should switch to a different instance type. And when we do that, we revisit the config, or we just recently upgraded from 5.5 to 5.6, and we're looking at the config for that. But no, I don't have any special tricks that I've done in the my.cnf specifically for the cloud. Some other people might, but we don't have any of that.
Okay, cool. Well, also, again, since you joined late, any other kind of, I think you were here for the last one where we talked about database defense. Did you have any other kind of things from your perspective that you do, or that for just special care in protecting the database, both performance, infrastructure, security-wise, data integrity, anything in that?
Yeah, no, I think I've been lucky, and I haven't had any rogue developers writing bad queries that have killed my database yet. So a lot of it with me is just it's the nature of our team that we're pretty small, and there's nothing really happening on the database that I'm not involved with. So, and most of the traffic we have is fairly small. We don't have a lot of batch operations or things like that. That can have a larger impact on the database. So, for me, it's what I'm defending against more often is things like, stampeding with memcache goes down, or something, stampeding like that, more so than just defending it from the application itself.
Okay, so actually, that does bring us into kind of another sub area of database defense that I want to get to, which is tooling around it and what can you do. And so the last time we spent a lot of time talking about kind of health checking and uptime, like checking, and services that ultimately allow you to determine if a database is healthy before even going to talk to it. And so Shalomi had talked about something they have at Outbrain. You mentioned that you guys have HA proxy for some of the read volume. But the thing I wanted to get at was, once those actually get surpassed potentially, provide maybe something happened and got through that initial layer of defense, or maybe you don't have that layer of defense set up. What are your options and what can you do? And so typically, it's kind of the DBA tool chain. And so Ike, you had given a pretty good talk on building tool chains at the Percona conference. But things like if your server gets flooded with certain types of queries, what can you do? Can you use ptkill? How do you use it? And it's one of those, if you haven't used ptkill before, I'd say that it's hard to figure it out the first time, especially in that emergency situation. And it's definitely something like, if you haven't, make sure you sit down and figure it out. Recently I just learned that I can use ptkill to find duplicate queries on a server, which is extremely valuable to figure out where there's just basically the same thing being flooded. And there's also options to have it kill all but the oldest query on the server, so that you can give one of them a chance to get through and keep all the younger ones.
Usually, if you have to use ptkill on a server that it's already unresponsive, it's too late, because you won't be able to make it log into the server and get a timely process list to be able to act upon. So the problem I had with ptkill is in some DevOps environments, the developers would say, no, don't kill any of my queries. And then I found out that the application was timing out after 60 seconds while the queries were running for 5 minutes. And I told them, if the application is running, timing out after 60 seconds, why can't I kill a query that is running after 5 minutes when the application is already moved on into something else? Which that created interesting denial of service problems, because what the users were doing is the query was timing out, so they were hitting the button again to get another query. So they would start firing the same queries that were stalling the server over and over and over again from the application. And of course, with each new query, things would get worse. I had that prepared actually for my horror stories. At the end, I'm not sure. I missed the last couple of Hangouts, so I'm not sure if you still do it. But there it goes. So by timing out the application and ignoring the query that it was already running, then they had, the user would trigger the behavior in the user of doing that. So it turns out that they were able to somewhat compensate for that by using a sleep between button hits. So even if the application would move on, it would still sleep for some time and letting the making the user wait before he could hit the button again that would trigger another query, which makes it an interesting way to defend yourself from rogue users or applications that are too generous with the user.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's definitely, and just that does happen. And I think last time I had mentioned that we have a tool that runs on all of our production systems and looks for queries that take too long and just effectively just whacks them. And if it happens to hit something that an application request is still tied to, then we go and work with the engineers on that one to figure out why did your query run for 60 seconds, when normally queries are finishing in milliseconds. What extenuating case does your query need? Like, if it's something that's run a lot, that's the other big thing. And then if it is a case where it genuinely just has to just run, then we can add it to the whitelist. But generally, it's something that it shouldn't have a reason to. I would argue it falls in the outlier category when you're in a high production OLTP type system. So Dan, you had mentioned something in chat. And got very quiet. So,
what did you mention?
You mentioned max user connections. I mean, I think that's one of the easiest ways to help protect yourself, especially under the guise of if you have multiple user accounts or if you have your applications broken across user accounts, you can set max connection limits per user.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, we use that in shared hosting, so like one dude doesn't have his blog spammed and take up all the connections.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of other, not just connections. There's other quota things that you can set on a per user level, I think, too, which I'm going to pull up shortly.
Yeah, so I guess I'll amend my previous statement that we don't change my.znf a lot, because we do change max connections whenever we change basically the maximum size of an auto-scaling group. To say that instead of 12 app servers connecting to my database, I'm going to allow up to 16. Then I increase max connections proportionally to make sure that I don't run out of connections from auto-scaling.
Yeah, we also added like the reserved connections. We just hard-coded like an extra 10 the reserved connections for super user, just because we have so many tools that have super that sometimes like when shit would hit the fan, we would try to log in and look, and something else was using up our reserved connection. So it's another little thing we did.
Yeah. Did you guys just write your own patch, or did you merge the Twitter patch that did that?
Nah, we just wrote our own.
Okay. Because yeah, that's definitely a big thing that I've seen, and I remember when I had mentioned that we had some automated tools that had the super privilege. Some folks kind of cringe, and they're like, your automated tools shouldn't have those, and I have mixed feelings on it, because I would argue the query killer tool or things that things that kill long queries, problematic queries, or long transactions, I want them to always be able to get in the server so that even if I'm not online yet, it can start protecting it and making it safe.
Then that also the need for super read only.
Yeah, would be nice. And super is also quite important for accounts which need to do things with replication. There's not really another way to do that.
Yeah, sorry for the pause. I'm actually trying to catch up on getting some notes captured from this. But yeah, so again, just tools in general, like other tools. What do when things get really bad? What else do you do? Are there other configs you change? Like max connections came up, and so you can set them on the per-user level. And Ike, you mentioned you guys change those sometimes based on different patterns and stuff. And I know, like for us, yeah, I think we actually found the ceiling for max connections with us. Like we found an OS level limit that we hit, and so we have vowed never to pass that now. And things need to always be kept under it. But other things that you can do, are there automated jobs that maybe you run that kind of just poke different counters on the servers, things like that? Don't all jump in at once.
Well, I was going to say one of the defaults that I always change is wait timeout. Wait timeout is the variable that waits until looks at the sleeping time of a connection, and then it drops that connection. And if you have the 8 hours default, as connections are dropped from the server, if they're not dropped, they keep all the local resources, and you might run out of memory, run out of handles, just because those connections are there sleeping. So by reducing the wait timeout, eventually the server is going to start cleaning up those connections, releasing the resources that they might have logged. And I've seen it happen, out in the wild, and reducing wait timeout was enough to solve it. And this has to do with applications that create a connection but don't really close it at the end, so they leave it hanging. And if they spin too many connections, basically you hit the maximum counts, and horrible things happen.
What kind of do you have any just general suggestions just general suggestions around what to set it to?
I usually set it to for the interactive sessions, which are the ones that you spin out from the MySQL client, probably 10 to 15 minutes. Otherwise, 5 minutes or 15 minutes is more than enough for an application that doesn't clean after itself.
Okay, yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because the other one that I was thinking of was lock wait timeout and InnoDB lock wait timeout, which are two variables that I feel like you don't think or know about them until you've encountered an issue where you kind of bump against it. And so lock wait timeout, if I remember correctly, defaults to a year, which is a very interesting setting.
Let's wait for that lock for a year.
Yeah. So that's lock wait timeout. And
because
then
of MyISAM.
Yeah, MyISAM. And then there's InnoDB lock wait timeout, which is defaulted to 50 seconds, 50, so just under a minute. Yeah, and so the interesting context around these is, InnoDB lock wait timeout is if you're using the InnoDB storage engine and a record's locked, how long a given query will sit and wait. So a good example that at least I've seen in our environment are certain queries that might do a counter type operation where you go to a record and when you go to update it, you set an existing field to that field +1 or something like that. Statements that are very, very perfectly 100% safe for replication all the time, if you're using row. But those become problematic when you have large operations that might lock these records, and then those queries coming in, they'll just sit there and wait almost a minute before they fail and report an error back. And so if you set that value lower, you can get those failures happening sooner, so you can know the record's locked, don't sit there and hang out for it.
The other one is the replication net wait timeout when you replicate across continents. People set it up to sensible values when you replicate across the country, or on a LAN on the same data center, but once you start jumping continents and network delays can get into the hundreds of milliseconds by default, and every now and then even get into half a second, then you have replication constantly, stopping because it times out. So you have to look into that as well.
That was it slave net timeout, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
I forgot about that one.
What is that by default? 10 seconds or something like that?
No, it's actually smaller.
Okay.
So 10 seconds is a sensitive value because it won't affect your operations most of the time. And the only thing is if you have network glitches and network interruptions, 10 seconds is a long time for the system to come out of, detect it and respond to it. So you have to balance, if you have a bad quality network, you have to balance how much you wait until it actually times out with how many times you get a replication interrupted because your network latency is too big.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll definitely have to take a look at that one because we're replicating from Virginia to Singapore, and I haven't seen a lot of timeouts, but I should take a look at that.
Yeah, that is the use case.
Okay, Dan had mentioned the default is 3600. It's very high. I think ours is set to 60, but I'm not 100% sure. We're not replicating that far yet. We are going across a, I don't know if I can say, but we're not going like east to west coast distance. But yeah, that is definitely something to keep an eye on. And that, like Jerry said, the behavior you'll see is maybe on the slaves that they just disconnected from the master and have to renegotiate, or they'll do a spin before they reconnect. And
yeah, but waiting a whole hour.
Hey, you never know. Maybe that master is unhealthy, and you need to just take a nap for an hour. So
well, we've had firewalls before kill our slave connections, and we're wondering like why replication's falling behind, and it's because it's waiting an hour for it to time out, and so we had to lower that considerably.
Yeah, and it's also quite hard to detect it from the master side because you just see a connected slave from the master.
Yeah, that was one of those issues where it's like, hey, I'm pretty sure this is a networking problem, and the networking guys are like, it's not a networking problem, and you can't get into it. NRAM.
Cool. So we've got probably about 15 minutes left. Are there other things with database defense, maybe counters, or not counters, sorry, config variables or tools that folks use, or do we want to kind of turn it over and let Ike give us his background on the 5.6 upgrade, and other folks can chime in there? Given by the overwhelming silence, I'm going to say, Ike, please take over. Tell us about 5.6.
Okay, cool. So I've been on 5.5 for the last year at least, and been eager to get to 5.6. The specific, everybody's got their own reasons to upgrade. For us, online DDL was a big thing. I like that a lot in 5.6. We use some full text indexes, which means we still have some my ISAM tables, so I wanted to try out full text index on InnoDB, so that hopefully we can get rid of my ISAM altogether, and also performance schema. So I'd been eager to get onto 5.6 early this year, and then at Percona Live, I felt like that was sort of another theme, was just seeing all the cool stuff in 5.6 and 5.7. It was time to make it happen. So I pushed through, and we're up to 5.6 in production right now as of yesterday. So pretty psyched about that. There weren't a whole lot of issues for us in the upgrade process. It's good timing for Shlomi. Maybe he'll talk after me about some of the problems he saw with 5.6. But yeah, so we have an active passive setup. So half of our databases are always sitting idle. So the upgrade path we did was to upgrade the passives first, and then flip those active with our regular Tuesday release that we did yesterday. There was one issue I had seen. I guess I didn't read the upgrading 5 to 5.6 document closely enough, but binlog checksum, those are on by default in 5.6, and that's something that didn't exist in 5.5. So when I upgraded the passive master to 5.6, it couldn't replicate to the active master anymore. because it was going 5.6 to 5.5, and the active master couldn't deal with the checksum bin log events. Not a big deal, right? Because what do I need to replicate from the passive to the active? But it just so happened that I hadn't flipped PT Heartbeat, so PT Heartbeat was still running on the passive, and that failed. So I actually blogged about that the other day. The fix for that was just to turn off bin log checksums, which is actually one of the recommendations they have in the upgrade document if you look at that. So that would be a good recommendation to read the MySQL upgrade docs pretty closely. But other than that, the 5.6 has been pretty smooth for us. We benchmarked against it, and it was fine. I've been looking closely at all the Munin charts, and everything looks happy. We didn't have to tweak a whole lot in my.cnf. There was the one about the implicit defaults for timestamps we set, and the bin log checksum one I mentioned. The InnoDB additional mem thing that's deprecated, so we turned that off. But overall, it's a pretty smooth upgrade. One thing I hadn't really realized until recently is the storage format change for timestamps, datetimes, and times. So those support milliseconds now. So they've got a variable storage format, and date times have gone down from 8 bytes to 5 bytes. So when you upgrade, all your old tables are using the old format, and the new tables, any new tables you create, use the new format. And so one of the things it says in the doc is you should upgrade your timestamps. It doesn't really tell you how to do that. But from what I can tell, just doing a rebuild does it. So, we got to 5.6 now. The next step is to go through and probably rebuild all the tables to upgrade the datetime and timestamp format. Also, going to start testing full text indexes in InnoDB, make sure I can use those, get rid of my ISM tables, and enable performance schema and start playing around with that. So yeah, that's my story. It's not the most exciting upgrade story, but I was happy that the upgrade process was pretty smooth for us, and I'm looking forward to actually starting to use the new 5.6 stuff now.
So you did an in-place upgrade on each machine then?
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, we were going. It's Percona server. We were on 5.5.30, and we went to 5.6.16, and it was in place. We didn't dump and import or anything like that.
Yeah.
Did you enable GTADs, or are you planning to do that at a later time?
That would be something to do later.
Oh, just turn them on. It'll be fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, that was definitely not going to be the first thing we did on 5.6. But it's an exciting feature, but it's not one that's an easy switch to flip, certainly.
Do you have are you using row-based or statement-based replication?
We're still statement-based.
Okay.
Yeah, with the 5.6 upgrade, I also did an upgrade to 5.6, and I created new slaves, and then restored the backup from the old 5.5 master. But that's quite a complicated procedure, because you can't just start the 5.6 instance with a 5.5 data directory. You first have to run a 5.5 instance on the data directory to get your physical backup online. So yeah, that was a bit of a complicated thing to do, but yeah, if you have done it once, then it's not that hard. But yeah, it's the problematic thing is that sometimes it does work, but most of the time it doesn't. So the first time you try it, you just use 5.6 with the 5.5 data there, and it works, and then next time you try it, it doesn't. But it's documented, so you shouldn't have to complain.
So you had mentioned implicit timestamp changes. Can you kind of give a little more explanation about that? What kind of, are there certain gotchas around that you should keep an eye out for, or?
Oh, yeah, you mean the bug I put in the group chat? Yeah, what happened today is that one slave, or one master-slave setup, the replication broke with the same issue in the bug, and that's because of the changes in timestamps. And here the column my scholar was complaining about wasn't even a timestamp. It was an integer, but you just have to do a dump and restore on the slave, and then it works. But yeah, the error message you're getting is not really helpful in this case.
Okay, and that's actually because the data type is a different size under the hood, so when the event replicates, it looks a little strange, or
yeah.
Okay. On 5.6, I mean, Ike, any other gotchas that you would call out that you've seen?
No, and actually we upgraded, so we went live with it yesterday in prod, and the passive databases are all still running 5.5, and so far, of course you're never supposed to replicate from a greater major version to a lesser one, but so far with that one change to binlog checksum, we've been able to replicate from 5.6 to 5.5 without a problem. So I thought that was cool because it gave me a day or two to wait before upgrading the rest of the databases in case something crazy came up and we had to roll back to the 5.5 databases.
Cool. Okay. Any other folks? Gotchas or yeah, Shlomi, come on, chime in, man.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a mixed experience with upgrading to 5.6. We upgraded some 6 of our slaves from 5.5 36 and 5.5 21, a couple old versions to 5.6 17, both Percona Server and Oracle Vanilla. And what we got is a mixture of very nice replication speed. We're not using parallel replication, just single-threaded replication with IO-bound machines. And we've got like a boost of like 30 and 40% improvement in replication time. So what I did was periodically and throughout different hours of the day and the week, stop some of our slaves to a designated number of seconds, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then start them again and measure how fast they come back to a lag of 10 seconds or so. Right? I wasn't looking for a complete zero. And it was consistently much faster with 5.6, so I was very impressed. On the other hand, I saw a significant increase in I/O, and in particular with InnoDB flushing. This showed up very clearly on the graphs, and it was the only metric that was correlated to the increase in I/O that I could see. And I spent like many days investigating this, getting acquainted with far more global variables than I care to get familiar with, like lower watermark for InnoDB, LRU, whatever. I really went through like a couple dozens configuration variables and tried them all, but I ended up with not being able neither to explain why this increased, neither to mitigate it. So one of our concerns was that it seems like even though 5.6 is more than a year out, we're still kind of early adopters, and we didn't feel comfortable with that. So for the meantime, I'm going to wait. I don't know, maybe I'm just a little burnt from doing these experiments. I'm going to wait for a couple more months, then try it again and see how it goes. But I was very impressed with the replication boost. That was the main reason for me to continue investigating this, because that was very promising. It means a lot to us to have fast replication.
Yeah, and that's actually that's good feedback. And so I pasted a link to your blog post about this. I've thrown that in the show notes because I was gonna say, like, for us, increased I/O from InnoDB, for me, I don't think would be as worrisome, just because we have very fast storage and we're typically not I/O bound. But the things that I'd be more curious to see are what kind of new CPU-intensive operations are going to happen. I mean, for us, a big thing we want out of 5.6 is, GTIDs is obviously the biggest one, right? And making the full commitment to row-based replication. But we also want to start messing around a little more with compression, turning that on, just to use a little more CPU cycles to save on some of the IOPS we do. but IOPS under the guise of write life of the device, of the solid states. And so if there is an unnecessary amount of InnoDB writes happening under the hood as a result of flushing, like that, I can see that being problematic because we're going to chew up those write cycles that the solid state drives have. But if the replication increases totally, if there's enough of it, it's definitely more valuable. And I think parallel replication was the other thing we were also really kind of hoping for because of our sharded environment and being able to just get that replication bump by having more threads based on number of database schemas you have. But yeah, I'll have more of my experience on this probably in about 3 months, I think, is like what our timeline to really kind of vet this out in our environment. But these are really good things like gotchas to know about. And I mean, Ike, just you mentioning that you should read the MySQL 5.5 to 5.6 upgrade manual, like upgrade documentation. I think that's something folks tend to forget. Like, it's MySQL 5.1 to 5.5. You just turn them on, go, and everything's good, right?
Yeah, I mean,
5.5 to 5.6, same thing, right?
It's a pretty easy read, and you definitely get a lot out of it. Although, I must say, I find the documentation not as straightforward as it used to be. Like, it used to be when I would read the docs, it would tell me exactly, this is the problem, this is how you fix it. I feel like lately it's left a little bit to be desired, like the timestamp thing. It's like, hey, you should upgrade your timestamps from 5.5 to 5.6, but it tells you nothing about how to do that. And it's, a table rebuild would probably do it, and it does, and it gives you a warning to say that it upgraded it. So it actually, the rebuild not only does it, but if you enable warnings or do show warnings, it'll say, hey, I upgraded the storage format for you, so that's cool. I still have to check information schema to see if there's a way, or to see if there's a way to tell which tables have the old format, so I can sort of script that to do the upgrade. I'll probably just go through, and any table that's got a timestamp or a date time or a time, I'll do a alter table force. But it would be cool if there was something in information schema to tell me which ones to do.
If the documentation is not completed or not correct, then please submit the bug report, because that helps.
Yep, I can do that.
Good sound advice for everyone to remember.
Yes. Yeah, Jeff, I mean, it's also just cool for me, I know you said it'll be a few months before you can have your whole 5.6 story, but I just like hearing what it is in 5.6 that you're excited about, because I think it's different for different people. Like you said, GTIDs and parallel replication. So actually, Shlomi, I wanted to ask you, were you testing out 5.6 just for kicks, or is there like a big feature in 5.6 that you're excited about using?
Yeah, I was hoping for optimizer enhancements, like indexes on implicit temporary tables, mostly replication and optimizer stuff. I already got that GDID is not going to be so easy to migrate into, so I'm giving up on this for a while.
Just for the same reasons, have you looked into MariaDB 10.0 and the optimizer improvements that it has itself?
I've not.
I'd be curious to have your take on that.
Cool. I might try that.
Yeah, I'd also be interested to know just in general how that looks too, because I remember I think the only bits I've heard about Maria are from you, Jerry, and then Shiri when she talked about Mozilla trying it out.
Yeah, and the other thing is you can turn on and off GTIDs at any time. Even in a running slave. So you stop slave, find the new coordinates, put the GTIDs on, and start replicating using GTIDs. No need to stop or do anything else. But I understand that it might be too green for some people to try it out. But I know how Shlomi tests things, so that's why I'm interested in him giving it some feedback.
All right, cool. So we are actually out of time now. I want to just super quick, first off, thanks everyone for making it today to talk about just database defense. And Ike, thanks for the 5.6 upgrade story and getting a conversation going around that. Real quick, I just want to solicit any other topics for the next time that folks want to cover or discuss. Nothing?
I've been brain dead with topics lately. So
I will see what I can come up with then. But if folks have anything else that they're interested in talking about or more, actually, Dan, I'd love to hear more about some of the stuff that you guys see in shared environment and with GoDaddy. So maybe we can talk about that next time, and we can come up with some ideas around that.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Cool. All right. Then beyond that, if you guys have any other thoughts on topics, just tweet at the Twitter account DBHangOps, or send me an email or hit me up on any of the other communication means. And beyond that, thanks very much for coming today, and see you all in 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.